Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Mai-Coh, an official scientist of the Midnight Society. Once again, you have gathered the courage to venture into the darkness of the fox den, as we have business to attend to, as always. Yet please, I really do need to feast. Yes, that was a little bit more messy than preferred. No worries though, it was absolutely delicious. And now, without further ado, Mai-Coh, my friend, I have a few contracts we must go and collect. My creatures of the night, welcome back to another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. We do have one of the residential scientists for the Midnight Society, Mai-Coh, already sitting around the late night fire as we again burn the midnight timber into the early hours of the morning. We are going to be looking into potential ancestors that could fall into line with maybe some of these strange Dogman sightings, which some of the science team thinks there might be more involved than actually per se canines. We do know the amphicenoids and the amphicenidae, the bear dogs, were potentially bipedal as well, not fully bear, not fully canine. Super interesting. Yet, Mai-Coh, my friend, are you ready to go collect a few of these contracts I have to go do?
I'm so ready. Let's go.
Haha, great stuff. Well, I would like to toss you the mic. I did already let the audience know what we're going to be diving into. Yeah, it's time to nerd out, and you are the scientist. Let's do this, my friend.
Nerding out is my favorite. All right. So, we're here to talk about three interesting, strange prehistoric predators. They do have a lot of similarities and they also have glaring differences. And none of them are canines and none of them are felines. Um, and it's hard to say if they're all quite even mammals, all right? But they've all got gnarly teeth, absolutely gnarly teeth. They all are, as far as we know, extinct. As far as we know, didn't leave any descendants, but they have some very intriguing and unique characteristics that I think if we dig into it, it's going to be real interesting. So, yeah. All right. So the first strange and amazing and interesting creature I would like to talk about, Thylacoleo carnifex. This is a marsupial lion. Okay. Now this is like, picture this, like it's got a pouch. Its ancestors were herbivores, but it was eating meat. This thing had a very cat-like silhouette, all right? Like it had like a long tail, it kind of had the low, slinky kind of body. Its face was kind of shaped, like a big cat. There's actually even some cave art or like rock art in Australia where like Aboriginal people have depicted, kangaroos very accurately, thylacines very accurately. Um, all these other creatures really accurately, and then there's this thing, but they're not around anymore, and it's like there's no other creature that really fits the outline and the like what the body plan would look like. So it's real interesting. There's one where it shows a person like spearing one, and there's one where it shows one like attacking a person. Actually, that's like on top of them. Kind of dreadful. So these things were possibly the stuff of nightmares of like actual people. They did live in Australia at the same time as like the first early people who were there. They had this is the craziest thing about these things. All right, they did not have saber teeth, but they had like their two front teeth, their incisors were like blade like shears. Okay. So instead of fangs, it was like in the middle. It's bizarre. There's never been another predator quite like it. And they were like, you know, they would grab things, meat like this. And this other crazy thing is their paws were incredibly unusual. They are the only marsupial known at all to have retractable claws. Like everything else, not retractable, like just normal, whatever. Just these things, like a cat, they could retract their claws. But the thumb was something else entirely. Okay, you know how like velociraptors had like these great, like they had like their toes, their regular, claws, and they had this great big one, like gnarly
Yeah.
big. Yes, that's what the thumbs were on this thing. Okay, like terrifying, and they were probably excellent climbers. They're built for climbing, and oh, we're getting into cave stuff too. Of course we are, because it's me and I love caves. They have found fossils of these things. Well, they've found some like deceased in caves, but they've also found caves where these things were using it as like a den. They were living there and they were raising their young in these caves. We're talking like New South Wales. Like there's some areas where there are caves that have like really steep like rock and mud embankments, and there are claw marks in these embankments showing that big ones and little ones were like climbing them successfully. Like they weren't like in there perishing. They were like living there and just this is like their den. It was like pitch black down in here, right? We're in the dark zone. It's not like 5 miles deep, but it's in the dark. But they had no problem. So they probably had good night vision if they're living in caves that comfortably, and they had to be excellent climbers. And they know it was these things because like with their weird paws, like those with their retractable claws, plus that great big gnarly raptor like blade on their thumbs, like there was no mistaking it. There was nothing else it could have been. So these things were really good climbers. And yeah, they were hypercarnivores. So again, it's incredibly rare that a creature like with herbivore ancestors becomes a hypercarnivore, like that eats only meat. Like we're not talking omnivore, where it's like, yeah, it eats a little grass, it eats a little, a few berries, and occasionally it might munch on something that's alive. Like, no, like this thing was like meat, right? So they were
Huh.
ferocious.
Isn't that how felines are, right? They can only eat carrion. If they don't eat enough meat, then it causes blindness and health issues for them, correct?
Yes, they're obligate carnivores. Like felines, if they don't get taurine, like they go blind and then eventually perish. Like you
Wow.
cannot have a vegan cat. Like absolutely not. They have like their bodies cannot make everything they need without having meat. They're forced to be carnivores.
That's so creepy. And what we're talking about right now just reminds me as well. There is a movie, which keep in mind, it's a horror movie, but it's called Carnifex. It's actually about what you're talking about right now and how this marsupial is just so fast up in the trees, ambushes people. It's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, and if we're talking about like a cryptid connection or like even folklore, you know, the like the Aboriginal people in Australia have an incredible oral history, right? Like stuff goes back weirdly really far. And it makes you wonder if some of the creatures in some of their tales are echoes of these things. 'Cause there are a lot of things that walked Australia, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40,000 years ago with people that are not there anymore. And yeah, it was some real nightmare fuel.
In your opinion, do you think this thing could still be alive? Meaning, like when you look at the cave hyenas, the short-faced
Mhm.
cave bears, the Dinopithecus. They only really went extinct supposedly around 10,000, 11,000 years ago. Same thing with like the woolly mammoths in Australia. It's pretty remote, right?
Yeah.
Again, assumptions aren't good. Probably kind of like Maine, where you got your clusters of people that are inhabiting an area, but then there's a ton of forest and outback. Could
Yeah.
this thing be roaming still?
I want it to be. So, um, from a science perspective, okay, the as far as the fossils that they found, those stop about 46,000 years ago. Okay. Like, or give or take. Like
That's a
this,
long time ago. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
this is like the Ice Age stuff that was only like 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago. Like, that's a lot more plausible. This was a very, very big gap, though. So, if they are, they'd have to be very rare and very much out there. You got to wonder, though, like, what if they became fully cave creatures? But, who knows? Like, I want them to be there, but also it's like that is such a big gap. It's very hard. Like, but Australia is huge. Like, I think if any continent could hide all sorts of bizarro things, there's like vast stretches where there's like no people who live there at all. Kind of like parts of Canada, except vastly different climate, right? So like any number of things could live there, but it's also pretty harsh too. So, who knows? I hope I would like them to be around, but it's like it's a stretch. Um, honestly though, less of a stretch than the other two on this list, to be real with you, because the other ones are like, yeah, like we're talking millions of years for the other ones on here. So anyway, so if this thing left descendants, they would have to probably make a living being very, very, they probably would be different than like the ones 46,000 years ago. They would have to be able to make a living in harsh conditions and be very, very elusive. So they did have some really unique adaptations though that have served other creatures really well, such as the retractable claws. Um, but yeah, these are super interesting, and I do think like if these could be ancestral to any like cryptid type of things, like they have a good possibility compared to many other ones. Um, the next one is also a marsupial. So we talked about the marsupial lions. Now, Thylacosmilus, which would be the marsupial saber-tooths. Now, a lot of people don't realize this. So right now, Australia is the continent of the marsupials, the pouched critters. That's where we have all of these interesting animals. And yeah, with a few scattering ones in like the Americas, who knows why those are there, right? Um, but they're pretty much all in Australia, and that's just their zone. It didn't used to be that way, because a long time ago, really long time ago, like Australia and South America they were like good buddies here, right? And so it used to be up until about 3 million years ago, South America was not touching North America. Now, it wasn't touching Australia anymore either, but it was full of marsupials. It had massive, interesting, like biodiversity when it comes to marsupials. So we had what I believe, well, I feel is one of the weirdest saber tooths in all of natural history. Okay. Like it is so bizarre. um, so yes, these these creatures basically evolved to fill the hypercarnivore like cat niche, saber-tooth cat niche, like just like the other things that have had saber teeth and were cat-like. But it was very different in a few ways. Okay, for one thing, the sabers kept growing its entire life. Like everything else that's ever had saber teeth, like they grow to a certain length, which may be very formidable, and then they're done. But this thing was never done. It just kept growing. It's a little terrifying. Um, it was probably an ambush predator. It didn't look like it was built for speed. It was kind of stocky. It was plantigrade. It's like sort of like a bear, like the way its back legs were situated. So it wasn't like super swift over long distances. But here's another really weird thing about it. Its eyes, it did not look cat-like. Its eyes were like on the sides of its head. Very strange to think of a carnivore with eyes like that. Because everything else is pretty much forward facing. Even our marsupial lions, they had a very cat-like looking little face. Well, for a marsupial, right? But these things were just not. Who knows? Who knows why these things were like that? It's very, very interesting though, because just like the marsupial lions, but on a whole different, vastly different lineage, these were also descended from herbivores. And so I guess they just didn't see the need to like make themselves have like the binocular vision thing to the same extent as other predators. Really odd. They weren't quite as big as the marsupial um, lions, though. They were a little smaller, and um, these were long gone by the time people hit the Americas. These were long gone by the time like human beings like evolved at all. So 3 million years ago, North and South America had been gradually doing this for like they'd been gradually just drifting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer, and then finally they touched, and that's what they had like. That's what they call the Great American Interchange that happened right then, because suddenly there's land, and so animals started being like, "Ooh, what's this new territory?" And so they started flowing into the new turf. So we had South American marsupials pouring into North America, and we had North American placental mammals pouring into South America, and it was chaos for a while. I find it very interesting, kind of an underrated like it was, but it's actually a fairly catastrophic event for a lot of species, because you would have animals that had filled the same niche, but like in North America versus South America. And then when this happened and they started to mix, they were competing all of a sudden. They didn't have competition before. So one of the main theories as to why the saber-toothed marsupials went extinct, like Thylacolus, was probably because suddenly we had real cats in South America, real saber-toothed cats. Like, we had Homotherium, we had Smilodon, like all of these things come like barging down in there, and they're big. They were bigger than these things were, but they had the saber teeth, and so they were filling a similar role in the ecosystem. And that might have been what spelled their demise. So, by the time people hit the scene, like a long time later, these things were like long forgotten fossils. I find it unlikely that anything survives of them today, just because like 3 million years compared to like a few thousand years, it's like so much. Um,
Hmm.
but they were very weird looking things. I am going to provide you with some illustrations so you can show anybody who's viewing this like what they looked like. Um, love being a paleo artist. I can draw this stuff myself, and then I can also like tweak it with the computer. I can make it look real. I might be able to animate some of it. It's The tools are getting crazy interesting. But I'm going to make sure you have visuals for all this stuff. We're not going to have to imagine. And I'm not just going to plug in a prompt to AI and be like, here, make your closest approximation of this. No, it's still not capable of doing something accurate by itself from just a prompt. Anyway.
That's great stuff. Quick question for you is, why do you think marsupials definitely cannot compete with felines or canines? It's bizarre. The reason I say that is over in Australia, foxes and such were not domesticated over there, but have been brought over there. And they absolutely eviscerated the local wildlife because the wildlife can't compete against that, like koalas and things and some of the ground birds.
Poor thing,
Why,
absolutely decimated.
right? Why do you think something like you were saying that has been put there to be hyper carnivorous
Yeah.
can't even go head to head with a canine or a feline? Because if you look at any areas, as far as I know, marsupials don't evolve alongside of felines and canines, correct?
Yeah, they don't really thrive. It's weird because like the marsupials kind of evolved in some relative isolation, and there wasn't a lot of competition from placental mammals. And for some reason they did really well where they were at in like, South America and in Australia until this interchange, right? Or until invasive species come along. So marsupials have a few things that are not going for them. They grow more slowly because basically with the pouch situation, they're practically born premature, right? And then they have to be in their mother's pouch for a long time, and it's this whole long thing, and it just makes everything just take longer. It takes longer for them to grow and raise their children. Whereas like, placental mammals, we just pop out these babies, and yeah, they're helpless a little bit. Well, some of them, like horses, are ready to run within hours. And so they're ready to go. Also placental mammals for whatever reason tend to have larger brain sizes. So the poor marsupials don't have very big brains in comparisons. Maybe maybe that's a factor. That's terrible. We have a few that have done well. Okay, like the lone, Virginia opossum, the only little North American marsupial. Bless its heart, it has its own little thing. It just wanders around, and they're not known for being bright, but they're they can be cute. They have their own little lives, and yeah, they're doing fine. But yeah, South America, there's other kinds of opossums actually that are related to it. Like there's several species. It's like not even fair. They have more. um, but yeah, I guess just the opossums went near, they went up for the Great American Interchange, and they're like one of the only marsupials that went north that actually did well, that like stuck around until today. But yeah, it's a combination of things though. Yeah, and of course, in the case with the saber tooths, like just the actual creatures themselves, like were the marsupials were smaller. I mean, goodness. Like the saber-toothed cats were like massive. Like they'd been hunting megafauna. Now, these, the marsupials were hunting like the big creatures of South America too. So it's not, it's similar, and they had probably similar techniques. They probably were like doing a lot of slashing and very violent, classic, similar, but again, they were a little bit smaller, maybe not quite as bright, and they had even if they weren't actively like fighting them, they could just be outcompeted because, maybe while they're raising like their young, like, two or three little cubs, if you want to call them, maybe joeys, I guess, maybe all marsupials, maybe they're raising their joeys. And like, meanwhile, like the Homotherium, the saber-tooth cat, scimitar cat next door has churned out like 2 whole litters in this time, right? And they're like running around, and you know what I'm saying? Like they can just like, they got left behind somehow or another. We don't know for sure though. It was a really long time ago. And there's some evolutionary trajectories are really well documented. I don't think their trajectory is very well documented. Like, poof, there they are. I really wonder, like, how did these things go from like herbivory to like hypercarnivore, like forever growing saber teeth? It's really fascinating, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
know that we have any simple answers.
No, that was great stuff right there. And to the audience, guess what? What if I told you we have some more stuff to nerd out about before we let Mai-Coh roll?
All right. All right. So last thing. Going back in time, like very, very far back in time. Okay. We're going to the late Permian, which is the worst mass extinction that Earth has ever known. Like over 90% of life was wiped out. That is far worse than the whole meteor thing that did end the non-avian dinosaurs. Like it was really bad. Um, so this is, yeah, think 260 million years ago. Okay. That's a really, really long time. This is before the dinosaurs. Okay. Pre dinosaurs. We had these gorgonopsids, and they were predating true mammals by give or take 200 million years. Like these were not what you would call like regular mammals. Okay. But they used to be called, now we don't call them this anymore because it's like oversimplified. But to give you an idea of what these creatures were like, people used to call them mammal-like reptiles. They're not though. They're synapsids. Now, dinosaurs, crocodiles, turtles, birds, they're diapsids. So it's something about like the skull and like the things, the way it all connects. It's like a very like life diverged here, right? And like this is why Dimetrodon, those big sailback critters from the Permian, those are more closely related to us, to mammals, because they're synapsids. They're not diapsids. So these things, the gorgonopsids, were saber tooths. They were saber tooth creatures. And to give you an idea, like they probably looked a little bit lizardy, right? Like they didn't have external ears. Like we can be almost positive they didn't have external ears. So they just had kind of like this head, but they had like a muzzle, and they may have had whiskers. On a lot of like relatives of these things, they have found like really well preserved skulls that had these little like pits, like like creatures with whiskers would have. So they probably had some form of hair, but maybe they probably weren't super fluffy. They laid eggs. They had to have, because you know we have like the platypus and the monotremes that split off from mammals like a lot after this. Those were laying eggs still, right? So these things were laying eggs, but they had some mammal-like characteristics. But here's the thing that put them, like, you wouldn't think this is a lizard if you looked at it, because they would walk with their legs underneath them. You know how like a crocodile walks around like with its little arms sticking out beside it, and its legs, it's like like beside it? No. But like you see a dog and its paws, its legs are underneath its body. Yeah, that's what these things walked like. Okay. But they had these massive canines. Like they were true saber tooths. They had, okay, a lot of reptiles, their teeth can be fairly, uniform. But no, these had like all these different teeth with different roles, just like mammals. And so they had these massive, massive fangs. And so in the great like all this stuff got wiped out, right? Like all of these creatures, no more Dimetrodon, and all the Gorgonopsids like went away, except for one genus. Unfortunately, they they did not leave any descendants that we know of, but Smilosaurus ferox, they were fox-sized. So this is not like they had some relatives, some cousins before the Great Dying that were massive, like terrifying, like big cat size, or even like, you know, maybe a little like maybe a little larger than what you'd think from like for a normal big cat, like pushing, at least pushing it for the big cat sizes, right? Like they were large creatures, but these things were just fox sized. So they still had the saber teeth, but possibly, one reason they might have survived was they could survive on fewer calories. They were able to they probably weren't so specialized on eating like massive amounts of meat. They could like, like a fox, skirt around and get stuff and be, survive. Of course, I don't know how clever they were. Their brains were much more simple than like any mammals that came after, like much smaller. Like it was a lot more like a reptile brain, but with a little bit of difference, heading our way, but not anywhere close to like, the stuff that would come even, oh, goodness, yeah, even like I guess 200 million years later is like a lot. But early mammals were probably a little smarter than these things, but still, they they lived probably in burrows. They found some fossils of them in burrows, and so that's probably how they survived some of the scorching, horrible conditions after the mass extinction. They were really interesting. They survived a mass extinction event, but they were doomed. They didn't like they were able to scrape by for a while, maybe even for like a few million years, like enough to leave substantial fossils that we found quite a few of them. But then they just sort of peter out. They didn't leave any descendants that we know of. But it is very interesting comparing all of these, how like multiple times, all throughout deep time, nature keeps bringing us these same themes. They're in wildly different species, wildly different time periods. Okay, saber teeth or massive weird teeth, like hypercarnivory, right? Like where they eat meat and that's what they do. Like they specialize highly in it. Like it's very interesting that it keeps happening. Similarly, all over the world, like there are some sorts of cryptids that where you hear that like it keeps coming back. Like people keep having stories about, for example, upright canine creatures, right? Like all different cultures, like a whole bunch of them all over the world, they have these similar things. Why? Like it's very interesting. Like there's something there. There's some reason that these creatures keep evolving. There's some reason that we keep hearing about upright canines. Um, so all like especially those two marsupials, they kind of filled cat-like roles without being cats. And we've speculated on this channel before. Dogman, like it looks canine, but like there's a lot of different ones, maybe it wasn't even canine, right? Or maybe it isn't even. Maybe it just looks that way. Because we see with convergent evolution things that would have looked a lot like a cat that wasn't a cat. Things that things evolving saber teeth over and over. It makes you wonder. There's been things that looked like dogs too, like I don't know, or the hyenodonts, like things that were like hyenas that were not. Like all these things that they don't leave descendants, but they were similar to what we have. It's very interesting. But yeah, just for context again, for these three different ones, the Smilosaurus was before dinosaurs, like that's really long. Thylacosmilus was like in South America, like when it was like an island continent, right? Like other creatures beside it, like giant ground sloths, terror birds, and then like Thylacoleo was the most recent one, and that was in Australia. And there was the giant kangaroos there, and there were people. They ran into people. So we got three very different situations, but they all had gnarly teeth, real gnarly teeth.
Yes, that is some pretty excellent stuff. As always, straight up nightmare fuel. It's just important to look back in the fossil records and just see where potentially some of these could fall in line. I mean, a lot of times people are correct in assuming if you got four legs, that's your preference. Yet there's a lot of science really pointing towards the giant sloths, again, having the hips set up to be more comfortable upright. And they actually were believed to have spent the majority of their time upright as well. They were
Yeah,
huge.
massive. Very, very cool. And that's a good and, some of these little things, like, so that evolved with them, and, like, some people are like, "Well, like, Dogman, how could canines or something like that evolve to be, like, bipedal, whatever?" But you see, like, these random one-off traits, those pop up all the time, like, okay, the marsupial lions, like, where the heck did their little retractable claws come from? They didn't
Hmm.
have ancestors with retractable claws. That's a cat thing, right? But poof, they needed
That's
it. It helped
so
them.
gnarly. It makes
Yeah.
me think, especially with a lot of the Gugway stuff and the baboon like Dogmen. In the
Mhm.
future, I'm going to be diving back into the aspect of over in India where people were attacked by what they said was a baboon man wearing metal type claws and a military suit get up, and it was absolutely terrorizing people
Was.
all through the city. Again, that sounds a lot like a Gugway or such.
Oh my word. Yep. That is really scary. Like, I don't know, the world is more vast and full of strange things than we know. And just because we haven't found everything yet, just because we think something is gone and extinct a long time ago, you know, things have popped up again. You never know. It's a big world out there. And people are
That
seeing
it is.
interesting things. Yeah.
Preach right there. Well, my friend, as we are starting to tie this up, do you have anything else you would like to touch base on tonight or share with the audience before you give yourself, as our buddy JJ Messenger says, a shameless plug? And if you would like to explain what you're going to be doing here on your YouTube coming up in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Well, I guess evolution just shows us that, like, wolves and saber tooths, like, they keep coming back, right? And so, and then, like, folklore shows us that essentially Dogman keeps coming back too. It's food for thought anyway. Um, and yeah, I'm launching my channel soon with the cryptid cavern, because of course caves and cryptids, like, I'm into that stuff, right? um Gonna be a mix of, like, actual documented encounters versus, like, stories. And by the way, like, I am going to make sure it says in the video every time, like, if it's a creative writing project, it's not going to be presented as if it is a real project, like as if it's a real event. I just So some people enjoy stories, and some people are like, if it's not something that allegedly happened, I don't want it. I want people to be able to tell. um, but yeah, I'm excited about it. I've got this backlog. I'm about ready to just start throwing them out there. So thank you for the plug. I've still got my Etsy with cryptidy designs, some of which you've probably seen on the channel here. And that's starting to pick up some steam too. I guess as the holidays are approaching in future months, people are already starting to pick up some gifts for people. So that's always exciting. But yeah, cryptid stuff, it's super, super cool. And thank you for having me on, Star Fox.
No, of course, totally appreciate you. You are one of the residential scientists. You're always part of my squad. No, you're super busy, yet the more you pop on over here, absolutely great stuff. To the audience, yes, check out the links that Mai-Coh just spoke of. She's literally in the description of every one of my videos, though, so it's not that hard to find the description and the links to check out her stuff. She's also in the description of my page as well and helps out with a ton of the artwork, considering, yes, all I do is edit and repeat, which is no complaints. But yes, I do not have the most time to churn out stuff. Mai-Coh is part of that process. Go support everything she's doing as well. Thank you so much for kicking us with us tonight.
Yeah, anytime. It was great fun. You have a good evening.
My legendary creatures of the night, I do adore every single one of you. And thank you for hanging out tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, share the truth to the algorithm. And remember, there are things that go bump in the night that are much worse than anything you can truly imagine.